What does it mean to be great in the eyes of God? To be great in the eyes of God simply is to be for Christ and Christ alone. I'll preach a lot about making ourselves a self-gift and to giving of just our entire lives, dedicating it all to Christ through other people. But what does that mean? What does that involve? How do we achieve that greatness? Often it's through sacrifice. It's through sacrifice and suffering, particularly. This Sunday, I want to talk a little bit about just the basic Catholic notion of redemptive suffering. It's a good reminder for us that every bit of suffering we face in our lives is not to be wasted, but to be, as we as Catholics are known for saying, offered up, to be transformed. It's what the Son of Man did. Suffering, then, can only make sense and be understood in the context through the lens of the cross. Only through the cross does suffering make sense. To the world, it makes absolutely no sense. We know that. We're living in a world in which we avoid suffering at all costs. It's why people push euthanasia so hard, because they say, don't let people face the end of their lives. Don't let them face their suffering. Don't let people face Alzheimer's or dementia. No, let them end it. Let them choose to end their lives when they can, when they're still good. Because we don't like to see people suffer at any cost. It's kind of ironic that the Lord made us, and he made us in this human way, and he made us to love, and yet there's also this little crux of suffering. It's part of the fall, and he goes through, and he's the model for how we should suffer. It's what Isaiah, in the suffering servant, Isaiah, I think it was 52 or 53 that we read from today, it's what he captures. The Son of Man will come to suffer and to give his life as a ransom for many, as we hear in our second reading. To suffer, then. It's easy for us to think, I can offer it up. It's easy. We say, I can do that. When the time comes, I'll be able to do that. It's another thing than to actually do it when the time has come. Or, perhaps harder, is to watch others go through suffering. I was talking with a friend yesterday, and she was telling me about her aging grandmother, and we were going back and forth about my aging grandparents as well. And she was saying, Father Daniel, I hate visiting her because every time I go, I cry. Because I don't know if it's going to be the last time. And I said to her, but do you realize what you're doing? Do you realize what your visit means to her? Do you realize by entering into her suffering that you're sharing in her pain, that you're bringing joy to her life, that you're taking the suffering and transforming it in a very little way for maybe an hour or two into something that's good, into love? Suffering, God gives us it not to be wasted, but in every suffering we face to be transformed and offered up. Offered up for somebody, something, somewhere in the world. It's a radical concept, but we've got to look at the cross to imitate him. On a personal note, several years ago when my grandmother was dying, and it was like one thing after another, and her ailments just kept getting worse and worse. It was only then, once she passed, that reviewing all her ailments from head to toe, I realized that every single ailment she had matched a wound on the cross. By the world's standards, she was imperfect, but by God's standards, she was made perfect in his sight. Suffering offered up, redeemed. But we don't have to face it alone. No, I always say this. We never face it alone. We don't face it without any other nourishment. But we face it in receiving Holy Communion week after week. Just think of the offertory, the chalice that is offered up. Arissa, this week is your first Holy Communion. And it's a really special time that we go over just this, that the body and blood of Christ that you receive is both sweet and bitter, that its sweetness is the divine grace within it, that there's a grace that God gives us within Holy Communion to endure every single suffering we'll face in our lives, to embrace the call to discipleship. St. Francis de Sales encourages us, or first, though, the bitterness. But the bitterness comes from the cross, that this sacrifice came from suffering. At the high school this past week, I was showing a video when we were explaining about the Mass, and there's this image of the chalice being lifted up and the cross dripping down blood right into the chalice. It's a beautiful image to think of in our heads. And so there's both this sweetness and this bitterness in receiving Holy Communion. St. Francis de Sales encourages us when he says, "The same everlasting Father who cares for you today will care for you tomorrow and every day. Either he will shield you from suffering or give you unfailing strength to bear it. Be at peace then and put aside all anxious thoughts and imaginings. As you participate, and all of us participate in this Eucharist today, and as we drink from the chalice that Christ has consecrated with his precious blood, we're given fortitude in times of doubt and of fear. All of us will have to face suffering at some point. We cannot run from it. As much as we try and technological advances advance, all of us have to face suffering and enter into the sufferings of others. It's our call as Christians not to run from it, but to embrace it. May we do so all the days of our lives. Amen.